Sabah al-khair. Right now we're going to talk about assimilation in Form 8 verbs, or what we would call in Arabic al-Mumaathala. Mumaathala is a kind of transformation that occurs within certain combinations of this verb pattern, Form 8, ifta'ala, and roots that begin with certain letters, including the ones we have here: ta, za, val, sad, dad, ta, dha, and waw. In cases where a Form 8 verb has a root, a judr, that begins with one of these letters, certain changes of spelling and pronunciation are going to occur to the ta that constitutes part of this Form 8 pattern. These changes can seem a little bit arbitrary, but in most cases you'll notice that they actually result in the final product being easier to pronounce. Certain consonant combinations are just kind of difficult to say, and the modified construction that we wind up with is reflective of that reality. And as advanced learners, we need to be able to recognize this change when it occurs and understand why it's happening. So right now what I'm going to do is walk you through a couple of examples and demonstrate how they differ. Let's take a look at these jurur over here, these roots. When we have a waw as the first letter of the judr, the root that we're putting into the pattern ifta'ala, wazn ifta'ala, the waw is going to disappear. If we did it straight, we would wind up, in this case, with waw ha dal, that root that has to do with oneness, we would wind up with a word, if we ignored this change that happens, that sounds like yutahada. And formal Arabic really doesn't like that vowel combination, you, which is easy to remember because it sounds gross, right? You. So the solution, what we do instead, is drop the waw and double the ta. So we wind up with ittahada, which is a verb that means to unite, where we get the word muttahada in al-wilayat al-muttahida, the United States. When we have a judr that begins with a ta, we do sort of the same thing. We double that ta, and the two tas cohabitate underneath one shadda. So we have tabi'a, a verb that sort of means to follow, but if we want to talk about following in a more abstract sense, coming after, we do this, where again, we double the ta, we add a shadda above it, and wind up with ittaba'a. Now with certain sibilants, like za and val, what we do is, again, this ta has to change. And in the case of za, it's sort of tricky to pronounce z and t back to back. If we ran it straight, without knowing what we know, we would wind up with izdahama. So we have that z, we're using our voice box, and if you say it fast, you'll find that the ta here winds up sounding like a dal anyway. So when we pronounce this word, this Form 8 verb, we just say it and spell it with a dal. Izdahama, which is a verb that means kind of to be crowded. You might remember that from Al-Kitab Volume 1. With all of the emphatic consonants, sa, da, ta, and dha, similarly, it's difficult to pronounce a ta after them and have it retain its non-emphatic quality. So what we do instead is we just turn it into a ta if it follows a sad or a da. So in the case of sadama, which means sort of to strike, we can create a verb meaning to collide, where we take that ta and we turn it into a ta to reflect the sound of the sad. And we get this, oh, I forgot my line. Istadama instead. Dahada, same thing. After that dad, we're going to change the ta of the pattern to a ta to get idtahada, a verb that means kind of oppress. And with tala'a, we're going to change that ta to a ta, but then we're going to have two tas, which means that we can do the same trick we did up here and put them under one roof with a shadda. Ittala'a. Ittala'a ala, meaning kind of to get or be acquainted with or take a look at something. One last example with vel. This one's a little odd. Dhahra, which means sort of to store or put away. Vel and ta are an odd combination. It's tricky for our mouths to get from the to ta. And in this case, with vel, what we do is we actually wind up with a dal sound. It's the compromise, the in-between, the middle. So if we're putting dal khara into the pattern ifta'ala, we wind up with iddakhara, a dal, meaning sort of to accumulate or amass something. That's our compromise. As a learner, maybe the most important thing is to recognize these exceptions so that you aren't tripped up by their strangeness and novelty when you encounter them in the wild. If you see a shadda on what looks like the first root letter of a word, or if you see a verb or a word that looks as though maybe it has an emphatic ta in a word that has slightly more letters than it should for an ordinary judr, there's a high likelihood that what you're looking at is a verb that has mumaathala going on in it. Typically, you aren't going to be constructing many new words on your own, but if you encounter an unknown word and you need to look it up in a dictionary or want to try to recognize it from your accumulated previous knowledge, this should help you narrow it down and avoid any potential for confusion.